Admiral Zextal of the Galactic Concordat adjusted his ceremonial sash for the 7th time in as many minutes. The bright lights and constant noise of the Human Entertainment Center assaulted his sensitive antenna, making him wish he'd stayed with his diplomatic escort. Yet something about this place drew him deeper into its chaotic interior. The establishment called itself Galaxy Games Arena, a designation that had initially made him scoff. The Concordat had long since abandoned such frivolous pursuits in favor of practical training simulations. Still, his mission to evaluate humanity's readiness for interstellar cooperation required understanding all aspects of their society, even the seemingly pointless ones. A crowd of young humans gathered around one particular corner caught his attention. Their excitement registered clearly on his biosensors, but it wasn't the typical chaotic energy he'd come to associate with human children. This was different, focused, almost disciplined. Threading his way through the crowd, his tall, iridescent form drawing curious glances, Zextal found himself looking over the shoulder of a young human female. She appeared to be approximately 12 standard cycles old, though human aging still confused him. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes never left the holographic display before her. Warning: hostile craft detected in Sector 7. Announced the game's computer in a crisp, professional tone that wouldn't have seemed out of place on a Concordat bridge. The Admiral's antenna twitched with interest. The girl's fingers flew across the control interface. On her main screen, a small craft, clearly of human design, executed a perfect tactical rotation while maintaining its momentum vector, a technique that had taken Zextal himself 3 years to master at the Academy. "Sarah's going for the record again," one of the watching children whispered excitedly. "She always gets past the curl of nebula sequence." The nebula in question materialized on the screen, its swirling gases rendered with surprising accuracy. The girl, Sarah, didn't hesitate. She directed her ship into a spiraling approach that used the nebula's own electromagnetic fields to mask her engine signature. Another advanced tactic, one that the Admiral had used himself in the Proxima campaign. "Pursuing vessels losing lock," the computer announced. Sensor efficiency reduced to 30%. Sarah's ship emerged from the nebula's opposite side, but she wasn't done. In a move that made Zextal's inner membranes contract with surprise, she initiated a controlled plasma vent. The superheated material interacted with the nebula's particle field, creating a cascading reaction that briefly illuminated the pursuing ships. "Targeting solution acquired," Sarah announced calmly, her voice carrying the same professional tone as the computer. Her fingers danced across the weapon's console, and streams of energy lanced out with precision. The hostile ship's shields flared and failed under the assault. "Level complete," the computer announced. "New high score achieved. Tactical rating: superior." The watching children erupted in cheers, but Sarah remained focused, already preparing for the next level. Zextal found himself leaning closer, his diplomatic mission temporarily forgotten. The game's interface was primitive by Concordat standards, yet the underlying principles it taught were anything but simple. "Would you like to try, sir?" Sarah had finally noticed him, turning in her seat with a bright smile. "This level has some really interesting gravitational mechanics." Zextal's translator took a moment to process her casual offer to let a senior military officer of an advanced alien civilization play what was clearly a children's game. Yet as he watched her skillfully beginning the next scenario, he realized he might need to revise his definition of children's game. "Perhaps I will," he replied carefully, his antenna rotating forward with interest. "But first, please explain to me how you knew to use the nebula's electromagnetic field in that way." Sarah's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, that's just basic stellar phenomena manipulation. Would you like me to show you some of the really advanced techniques?" Basic. She had called it basic. Admiral Zextal felt his report to the Concordat High Command was about to become much more interesting. "The key to the Stellar Command Series," Sarah explained, her fingers hovering over the holographic controls, "is understanding that everything connects to everything else. She demonstrated by reducing power to the forward shields, redirecting the energy to the ship's sensor array. See how the power distribution affects multiple systems. Admiral Zextal's neural augments were working overtime, recording and analyzing every detail of the game's interface. What the humans called Stellar Command 2185 bore an uncomfortable resemblance to the Concordat's own bridge training simulators. This scenario is one of my favorites, Sarah continued, unaware of the Admiral's growing fascination. You have to escort a civilian transport through contested space, but your ship is undergunned, and the enemy knows exactly where you're going. The scenario loaded, presenting a tactical situation that made Zextal's antenna twitch with recognition. The configuration was nearly identical to the infamous Kazakh Ray incident, a classified operation from 30 years ago. Most players try to outgun the raiders, Sarah said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found a better way. But that's not how real space combat would work, right? Indeed not, Zextal replied carefully. How would you approach it? Sarah's response was to angle her ship's approach vector, using the civilian transport's larger mass to create a gravitational microlens. The technique effectively doubled her sensor range while making her own ship harder to detect. It was an advanced application of relativistic principles that most Concordat officers didn't grasp until their 5th year of training. The trick is thinking in 3 dimensions, Sarah said, as if she were explaining something simple like atmospheric breathing. Space isn't flat like an ocean. You can use everything around you. A warning klaxon sounded as 3 raider ships emerged from behind a nearby asteroid cluster. Sarah's response was immediate and unconventional. Instead of retreating or attacking, she initiated a controlled reactor surge. The burst of radiation created a momentary sensor ghost, confusing the raiders' targeting systems. They always fall for that, she grinned, using the few seconds of confusion to reposition her ship. AI opponents are too dependent on their sensor data. They don't trust their instincts. Instincts. Zextal suppressed a shudder. The Concordat had spent generations engineering instincts out of their training programs, relying instead on precise calculations and established protocols. Yet here was a human child, casually demonstrating why that might have been a mistake. The engagement continued, with Sarah employing the dizzying array of tactics that ranged from textbook perfect to completely unorthodox. She used stellar winds to mask her engine signature, converted a sensor probe into an improvised mine, and at one point deliberately scraped her shields against an asteroid to create a debris field that confused pursuing ships. 7 minutes, 32 seconds, she announced proudly as the mission complete notification flashed across the screen. Not my best time, but still pretty good. How? Zextal paused, choosing his words carefully. How did you learn these techniques? Sarah shrugged, already queuing up the next scenario. Just playing, mostly. Dad got me started on the basic series when I was 7, and I kind of worked my way up. The physics engine in this version is really good. They worked with actual space pilots to make it realistic. Realistic. The Admiral's neural augments flagged the word. The game's physics engine wasn't just realistic. It was accurate enough to serve as a military training tool, and humans were giving it to their children as entertainment. Would you like to try a multiplayer scenario? Sarah offered, gesturing to the second control station. There's this really cool mission where you have to coordinate with your partner to collapse a protostar at just the right moment to create a hyperspace shortcut. Zextal felt his ceremonial sash suddenly becoming very tight. Collapsing protostars to generate artificial hyperspace shortcuts was supposed to be a theoretical concept, classified at the highest levels of the Concordat's research division. Perhaps, he managed, you could show me exactly how that works. The protostar scenario, loaded with a visual flourish that seemed inappropriately cheerful given its theoretical implications. Admiral Zextal watched as Sarah's fingers danced across the environmental controls, making minute adjustments to the stellar containment field. The trick, she explained, her voice carrying the same casual tone one might use to describe making breakfast, is to calculate the resonance frequency of the protostar's magnetic field. If you match it just right, you can direct the collapse instead of just letting it happen randomly. Zextal's neural augments were recording everything, but he found himself wishing he had brought a dedicated science team. The concepts Sarah was casually manipulating had consumed entire research divisions within the Concordat. Most players tried to brute force it. She continued, adjusting the containment field's amplitude. But that just wastes energy and usually ends up with your ship being crushed by gravitational forces. You have to be subtle. The word subtle, coming from a species known across the galaxy for their direct approaches, made his antenna twitch. Yet as he watched, Sarah demonstrated a level of fine control that would have impressed his most seasoned stellar engineers. "Watch this part," she said excitedly. "If you time the field modulation just right." She trailed off, focused on making microscopic adjustments to various power systems. The protostar on the screen began to pulse in a peculiar rhythm. According to his augment's analysis, she was creating a sophisticated resonance cascade that shouldn't have been possible with the level of technology displayed in the game. Yet there it was, working perfectly. There, Sarah pointed as a small distortion appeared in the space around the collapsing star. "See how the space-time fabric starts to fold? That's where you want to position your ship for the jump." Zextal's inner membranes fluttered nervously. The simulation was showing, with disturbing accuracy, the formation of an artificial hyperspace corridor. The math behind such an operation was supposedly beyond human understanding. Yet here was a child, creating one while simultaneously explaining the process as if teaching a newcomer to play. "The really fun part," Sarah continued, completely oblivious to the Admiral's growing distress, "is when you start adding multiple ships to the equation. Each one can help shape the containment field, making the corridor more stable. My friend Jamie and I once managed to keep one open for almost 3 minutes. 3 minutes, long enough to move an entire battle fleet through artificial hyperspace." The implications made his ceremonial armor feel suddenly very inadequate. "Oh, and here's something cool I discovered last week," Sarah said, pulling up a new set of controls. "If you modify the field harmonics just right, you can actually predict where the corridor will emerge. Most players think it's random, but there's definitely a pattern to it." Zextal watched in stunned silence as she demonstrated the technique. His augments confirmed what his eyes could barely believe. She had independently discovered principles of hyperspace manipulation that had taken the Concordat's best scientists decades to theorize. "Would you like to try?" she offered, gesturing to the second control station. "It's more fun with 2 players. The game's physics engine really shines when you start experimenting with cooperative maneuvers." The Admiral found himself moving toward the controls almost unconsciously. Part of his mind was already composing the urgent message he would need to send to the Concordat High Command. Another part was genuinely curious to see what other fun discoveries this human child had made while playing her game. "Perhaps," he said carefully, settling into the station, "you could show me some of these cooperative maneuvers. For educational purposes, of course." Sarah beamed. "Great. Let me show you this really neat trick I figured out involving quantum entanglement and stellar plasma. It's a bit tricky at first, but once you get the hang of it." Zextal's antenna drooped slightly. "Quantum entanglement. Of course. Why not add that to the list?" "All right, so the first thing you need to know about quantum entanglement in Stellar Command," Sarah said, switching the simulator to training mode, "is that it's not as complicated as everyone makes it sound. You just have to feel the rhythm of the particles." Admiral Zextal stared at his control panel, his neural augment struggling to process her statement. Feel the rhythm of the particles. The concept went against every principle of his military training, yet he found himself oddly intrigued. "Here, let me set up a simple scenario," Sarah offered, her fingers flying across the interface. "We'll start with basic particle pairing. It's like dancing, but with subatomic particles." The Admiral's antenna twitched at the comparison. The Concordat's quantum mechanics training involved complex mathematical formula and precise calculations. Nothing about it resembled dancing. Now watch what happens when I modulate the field like this. Sarah demonstrated, her ship creating a perfect quantum bridge between 2 points in space. See, the particles want to be in sync. You just have to help them find their partner. Zextal attempted to replicate her technique, his augments calculating the exact mathematical parameters needed. His effort resulted in a destabilized field that collapsed almost immediately. "Oh, don't worry about the numbers too much," Sarah said encouragingly. "Try closing your eyes and listening to the harmonics. The game's audio cues are really well designed." The suggestion to ignore precise calculations made his ceremonial armor feel uncomfortably tight, but he complied. The simulator filled his consciousness with a subtle symphony of tones representing quantum states. "There you go," Sarah exclaimed as his second attempt produced a weak but stable quantum bridge. "You're getting it. Now try adding a little spin to the field rotation." The Admiral found himself drawn into her teaching method despite his initial skepticism. Where his training emphasized rigid protocols, Sarah's approach encouraged experimentation and intuitive understanding. "You know what's really fun?" she continued, expanding the simulation, using quantum entanglement to create temporary shortcuts through normal space. "Watch this." Before he could protest the impossibility of such a maneuver, Sarah had linked 3 separate quantum fields in a configuration that his augments initially refused to analyze. The result was a stable micro-wormhole. "Your turn," she said brightly. "Don't worry about getting it perfect. Half the fun is watching things go weird when you mess up." Zextal's attempt to recreate her feat resulted in a spectacular failure that, according to his augments, briefly violated several laws of physics. Sarah clapped delightedly. "That was amazing," she exclaimed. "I've never seen anyone fold space quite like that before. Did you see how the quantum strings braided together? We should try that on purpose next time." The Admiral found himself struggling with an unfamiliar sensation. It took his augments several seconds to identify it as enjoyment. Despite his extensive training in advanced technology, he was learning new approaches from a human child's game. "Perhaps," he ventured, "you could show me more of these unorthodox techniques." Sarah's face lit up. "Of course. Oh, wait until you see what happens when you combine quantum entanglement with gravitational lensing. It's totally not in the tutorial, but I figured out that if you time it just right." As she enthusiastically explained her latest discovery, Zextal made a mental note to recommend significant changes to the Concordat's training protocols. They had spent so long teaching their officers how to think that they'd forgotten to let them play. "Ready to try something really challenging?" Sarah asked, already queuing up a new scenario. "This one involves synchronized quantum tunneling through a neutron star's corona. It took me almost 2 whole days to figure out." Zextal's antenna drooped slightly. 2 days. To master a technique that the Concordat hadn't even theorized was possible. "That's when I earned my Quantum Master achievement," Sarah said, pulling up her player profile on a secondary screen. "See, only about 30,000 players have managed that one so far." Admiral Zextal's antenna went rigid. 30,000. "Yeah, it's one of the rarer ones," Sarah continued, scrolling through her achievement list. "The Stellar Physicist badge is much more common. I think about 2 million players have that one. Oh, and practically everyone has the basic Helm certification." The Admiral's neural augments began calculating furiously. The implications of millions of humans casually mastering concepts that the Concordat considered advanced military knowledge were staggering. "Could you show me more about these certifications?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah brightened. "Sure. The game has this whole progression system. You start with basic flight controls, then work your way up through different specializations." She pulled up a holographic skill tree that made Zextal's inner membranes quiver. The basic tier included stellar navigation, emergency procedures, and power management. Intermediate skills covered phenomena that the Concordat classified as advanced tactical knowledge. The advanced tier contained theoretical concepts that his civilization was only beginning to explore. Most of my friends prefer the combat track, Sarah continued, oblivious to his growing astonishment. But I really enjoy the science and exploration paths. The physics puzzles are so much fun. And all human children have access to this training program, Zextal asked carefully. Sarah laughed. Well, Stellar Command isn't the only space sim out there. Some kids prefer Galaxy Quest or Star Navigator. She pulled up a comparison chart on her tablet. See, each game has its own specialty. Star Navigator has really accurate stellar cartography, and Galaxy Quest is amazing for xenobiology and first contact scenarios. First contact scenarios. Zextal suddenly wondered if his own diplomatic mission had been anticipated by countless human children playing through similar situations in their games. Oh, and the best part is how the games talk to each other, Sarah added, showing him her universal player profile. Skills you learn in one game carry over to others. Watch. She loaded up a different simulator, and her ship's controls automatically adjusted to her proven competency levels. The Admiral watched as she expertly handled a complex docking procedure while simultaneously managing a cascade failure in the ship's quantum core. The neural learning algorithms are really good at figuring out what you know, she explained. So you don't have to start from scratch with each game. Pretty cool, right? Neural learning algorithms. Analyzing and adapting to each player's capabilities. The Concordat's training program suddenly seemed hopelessly rigid in comparison. How many hours have you spent in these simulators? He asked. Sarah thought for a moment. Well, I usually play about 2 hours after school, maybe more on weekends. Less during exam season, of course. Mom's pretty strict about that. She pulled up her total playtime. About 3,000 hours across all games. 3,000 hours of intensive space combat, scientific, and diplomatic training, all disguised as entertainment, and she considered this amount typical. Want to see something really interesting? Sarah asked, already loading a new program. This is a multiplayer scenario my friend Jamie created. It simulates first contact with a silicon-based life form living in a neutron star's corona. You have to figure out how to communicate with them using modulated gravitational waves. Zextal's augments nearly crashed trying to process that statement. User-created content. They were letting humans design their own training scenarios. The community creates lots of custom content, Sarah explained proudly. There's this whole section of player-made missions. Some of them are really challenging. The ones from the physics graduate students are especially tricky. The Admiral's antenna drooped completely. Graduate students. Of course they were involved. Why wouldn't they be using children's games to test theoretical physics concepts? Back aboard his flagship, Admiral Zextal sat in his private quarters, surrounded by holographic displays of his afternoon's observations. His neural augments were still processing the implications of what he'd witnessed at the gaming center. Computer, begin strategic analysis, he commanded, his antenna still twitching from residual excitement. Compare human entertainment software Stellar Command 2185 with Concordat Military Training Program Alpha. The computer's response was immediate and unsettling. Analysis indicates 97% overlap in core concepts. Human software contains additional theoretical applications not present in current Concordat training protocols. Zextal had expected as much, but seeing the confirmation made his inner membranes flutter. Expand analysis to include all mentioned human space simulation programs. New holographic windows bloomed around him, each displaying data from different games Sarah had casually referenced. Star Navigator's stellar cartography systems were more accurate than the Concordat's current navigation computers. Galaxy Quest's xenobiology simulations proposed theoretical life forms that even their xenoscience division hadn't considered. Computer, calculate total human population currently engaged with space simulation software. Based on available data, approximately 2.3 billion active users worldwide. The Admiral's ceremonial sash felt suddenly tight. That was nearly a quarter of their population, all voluntarily participating in advanced space warfare training and enjoying it. Display temporal analysis of average human player progression, he ordered, watching as new charts materialized. The learning curves were astronomical. Concepts that took Concordat officers years to master were being internalized by human children in weeks. But it wasn't just the speed of learning that concerned him. It was the creativity, the willingness to experiment, to fail, to discover new approaches. The Concordats' training emphasized perfection and protocol. Humans had somehow turned the exploration of complex space phenomena into a game of what happens if I try this. Computer, Access Recording Segment 47B, analyzed the quantum entanglement technique demonstrated by subject Sarah Chen. The holographic display showed Sarah's casual manipulation of quantum fields, accompanied by her cheerful explanation about feeling the rhythm of particles. The computer's analysis was stark. Technique achieves 23% greater efficiency than current Concordat methods. Methodology does not match any known theoretical framework. That was the crux of it. The humans weren't just learning existing space combat techniques. They were innovating, creating new approaches that his civilization hadn't even considered, and they were doing it through play. Computer, project potential strategic implications over next 20 standard years. The resulting display made his antenna droop completely. At current progression rates, human space combat innovation would surpass Concordat capabilities within 5 years. Their theoretical physics understanding would exceed current Concordat knowledge in 3. But as he watched the recording of Sarah patiently teaching him her quantum entanglement technique, Zextel realized he was approaching this all wrong. The humans hadn't developed a superior military training program. They'd created something far more powerful, a way to make learning advanced concepts fun. Computer, begin drafting preliminary report to Concordat High Command. Priority level, immediate. Subject, proposed alliance initiative, human educational integration. As the computer began recording, Zextel rose and moved to his observation window, watching Earth rotate slowly below. Somewhere down there, millions of humans were casually mastering the secrets of the universe through what they considered entertainment. Begin report. Honored members of the High Command, I write to you not with a warning, but with an opportunity. In my evaluation of human civilization, I have discovered something extraordinary, a method of education so powerful, yet so simple, that it could revolutionize our entire approach to training and development. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Everything depended on the Concordat understanding what he'd witnessed. Computer, append personal notation. The humans have not created warriors. They have created explorers, scientists, and innovators who think it's all a game. And that makes them the most valuable potential allies we have ever encountered. The Concordat High Command's emergency session chamber had never felt so tense. Admiral Zextel stood before the curved table of senior officials, his presentation on human gaming culture reaching its conclusion. And so, he said, gesturing to the final holographic display, we have a choice to make. We can either view humanity's capabilities as a threat, or we can recognize them as the opportunity they truly represent. Supreme Commander Vexner's scales shifted to a deep purple of concern. You expect us to believe that children's entertainment has produced a civilization of tactical geniuses. Not exactly, Zextel replied, pulling up the recording of his session with Sarah. I expect you to recognize that humans have created something we never considered possible, a learning system that makes people want to master complex concepts. The recording showed Sarah explaining quantum entanglement theory as if it were a simple dance step. Several council members' antennae twitched in sync with their recorded counterparts' reactions. Watch how she approaches problem-solving, Zextel continued. No rigid protocols, no fear of failure. Every mistake is just another data point. Every failure a chance to try something new. But these are just simulations, protested Science Director Kel March. Surely they can't. With respect, Director, Zextal interrupted, Switching to a new display, their games operate on physics engines more sophisticated than our military training programs. The quantum mechanics modeling in Stellar Command alone is 3 generations ahead of our current capabilities. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Supreme Commander Vexnor raised a hand for silence. And you believe this represents an opportunity rather than a security risk. Look at what the human child taught me in just one afternoon, Zextal said, playing the footage of his quantum bridge attempt. Now imagine an official exchange program. They're game developers working with our military trainers. They're educational theorists helping us redesign our entire approach to learning. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The humans haven't just created better training programs. They've discovered how to make learning advanced concepts genuinely enjoyable. And they share this technology freely. Asked political advisor Mintel, her antenna bent in skepticism. They sell it in entertainment stores, Zextal replied, allowing himself a small gesture of amusement. Multiple competing companies create different versions, each trying to make their educational components more engaging than the others. A new wave of murmurs swept the chamber. The idea of competing to make education more entertaining was alien to their structured society. There's more, Zextal continued. Their games are continuously updated based on player feedback and discoveries. When someone finds a new technique or solves a problem in an unexpected way, that knowledge is shared with the entire player base. He brought up Sarah's achievement statistics. This child is one of 30,000 who have mastered quantum mechanics through play, not through years of rigid training, but through curiosity and experimentation. Supreme Commander Vexnor's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. And your recommendation, Admiral? Immediate alliance, Zextal said firmly. But not just military or political. We need a complete cultural exchange program. Let them teach us how they turn learning into play. In return, we can offer them access to real space experiences that will make their simulations even better. He gestured to the final display showing Sarah's excited face as she described her latest discovery. The humans don't see space as a battlefield or even just a frontier. They see it as the ultimate playground. And they're raising an entire generation to be masters at playing in it. The chamber fell silent as the council processed his words. Finally, Supreme Commander Vexnor spoke. You realize this would require significant changes to our entire educational system. Yes, Zextal replied, his antenna lifting confidently. And I believe that's exactly what we need. 6 months after Admiral Zextal's encounter with Sarah Chen, the Galaxy Games arena looked very different. Alongside the human children, young Concordat initiates now clustered around the gaming stations, their antenna twitching with excitement as they learned to feel quantum harmonics. No, you're thinking too much about it, Sarah said, now wearing an official cultural exchange program badge. She was helping a frustrated Concordat student with a particularly tricky stellar engineering puzzle. Just listen to the pulsar's rhythm. The math will follow naturally. From his observation post, Admiral Zextal watched with satisfaction. The integration program had exceeded even his optimistic projections. Concordat students were learning in weeks what had previously taken years, all because they were finally allowed to play. Admiral, Sarah called out, waving him over. You have to see this. Kickstall just discovered a new way to stabilize wormholes using synchronized gravity waves. It's totally different from the standard approach. The young Concordat initiates scales flushed with pride as they demonstrated their discovery. Where traditional Concordat training would have dismissed such unorthodox thinking, the gaming environment encouraged it. The result was a technique that the Admiral's neural augments confirmed was 42% more efficient than existing methods. Most impressive, Zextal said, his antenna lifting in genuine appreciation. Have you submitted it to the Stellar Command Community Hub yet? Already done, Sarah replied excitedly. The physics team at MIT is reviewing it now. They think it might have applications for real-world space travel. That was another unexpected benefit of the exchange program. The line between game and reality had begun to blur in the most productive ways. Humans were implementing Concordat technology into their games, while Concordat scientists were learning to approach real problems with human creativity. "Admiral," a voice called. He turned to see Dr. Chen, Sarah's mother, approaching with a group of Concordat education officials. "The neural learning algorithm data you requested is ready." The results were stunning. By incorporating human gaming principles into their training programs, the Concordat had increased their educational efficiency by over 300%. More importantly, their students were developing the one thing that had always been missing: innovation. "Watch this," Sarah said, drawing their attention back to the game. She and Kickstall had created a stable quantum tunnel using their combined techniques. Human intuition merged with Concordat precision. The result was something entirely new. "Most fascinating," one of the education officials murmured, their scales shifting to an impressed gold. "And you say this kind of collaborative discovery happens regularly?" "All the time," Dr. Chen confirmed. "The games provide a safe space for experimentation. When you remove the fear of failure, people naturally push boundaries." Zextel's antenna twitched as he remembered his own first gaming session with Sarah. They learn because they want to, not because they have to. A commotion from another gaming station drew their attention. A mixed group of human and Concordat children had just completed the infamous Kazakh race scenario in record time, using a strategy that combined elements from both cultures. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked excitedly. They used the Concordat precision targeting system, but applied it through the human intuitive interface. "That's so cool." The education officials were already recording the technique for analysis. In the past, such a merger of methods would have taken years to develop and approve. Now it was happening spontaneously, created by children at play. "You know what's next, right?" Sarah grinned at the Admiral. "We need to make a game that lets players design their own ships. Real ones, I mean. Imagine what we could create together." Zextel felt his scales shift to a deep blue of contentment. The humans hadn't just taught them a new way to learn. They'd taught them a new way to grow. And somewhere in the galaxy, a child was probably already designing humanity's first faster-than-light drive. They just didn't know it was real.